Could just be us four. Oh no, here we come. Hi, good evening, everybody. We'll just give it a couple of minutes while everybody drops in, and then we'll get started. Good. Well, welcome. We have a very exclusive audience tonight. I just want to, before I get started, just do some introductions. All of this has been pre-recorded, so you can view it back after, and we know a number do viewing after. So, as you know, my name's Dr. Scott Draw. I'm the Director of Sport at Millfield School. I just want to introduce some colleagues of mine who are on the call tonight that you'll be able to interact with. So, Miss Rhian Fox is Head of Dance and Drama. Mr. Mark Garraway, who's Director of Cricket, and Mr. Tony McCullum's our Head of Sports Coaching. All have so much diverse experience of coaching and working with young people. And they're going to be here sharing some of their wisdom tonight, particularly around this aspect of our Parents in Sport webinar series. For those that have joined us previously, we've had numerous conversations, and the one that this particularly relates to is one that was about mountains and valleys with Mr. Graham Williams and Ruben Paul, who's our developing apprentice sports psych on campus. And that was really about talking about the nature of the development journey for young people in sports. And the idea of the one tonight is to dig a bit more deeper, to really talk about those detailed conversations when things are maybe not going right, or just the principles in which we try to support young people. As you know, the reality of youth development is one of the most unpredictable times in any person's life, this age from 11 to 18. So most change physically, emotionally, and everyone's developing at a massively different rate. And it's one of the most unpredictable times in our life. So we've got to stay reactive to what's unfolding in front of us. And I guess the idea of recognizing that is the job of as coaches and of parents is to support our young people for as much as we can during that journey. So I'm just going to, one of the things that I just wanted to share was, if you have a device at home, we're going to do some slight interaction. And if you get your devices just while we're going through this, you go to menti.com. And if you use that code, you'll be able to log on to some of this content, and there will be some interactive elements to it as well. So I'll give you just 30 seconds to get your device. If I do the same here, I'll know how long it takes. And you go to menti.com and enter that code. If I do it here as well, you'll be able to see some of the content we've put together tonight, but also some of the interactions when we want some of your ideas and views as well. So if I just do this here. Okay, and when you're in, if you just hit the thumb, then I'll sort of know who's logged in. Great, that's perfect. So we can sort of see as people get selected. I'll just give it 30 seconds. Just while we're waiting for that, we've got a very international audience here tonight. So Mr. McCullum's in sunny Somerset, across in Minehead. That's an international country alone. We've got Rhian and Mark's away working on a cricket event in Denmark, and I'm up in Loughborough. So different parts of the world and across the country to sort of join you tonight. Great. So I'm just going to get sort of started. And just go through what we're going to do today. So I've got a very short video that I'm going to share with you just about sport and the nature of sport, which is reviewing, I guess, the beauty of what sport gives us, particularly for the development of young people. And then I'm just going to spend 30 seconds just talking about what we try to do here, but also I think the type of support that creates the right development environment for young people. So sport naturally is one of those domains and experiences that constantly creates high challenge. But to help people develop is also about high support. And today's exploration about those conversations is about how we may provide high support through it. A little bit just about our collective role as both parents and coaches around supporting the team behind the student. And then we're going to start some scenarios and get your view and opinion about those scenarios, about those conversations at that moment in time that happen through sport. So we'll call on some experiences that Rhian, Mark and Tony can sort of share that naturally occur through that engagement in sport. So I don't know if any of you are familiar with a very famous coach. I'm just going to pause it here, called Mr. Frank Dick. He's a Scottish guy, before I play his video, who's been coaching for numerous years. He's now in his 70s and does a lot in business. But I just want you to play this clip for you, which is just about the essence of sports and about where challenge plays a role in the development of young people. So just enjoy it. It's only 2 minutes.
You know, 100 years ago, I was a Scottish national coach. I used to go around the tracks of Scotland, working with coaches. And every now and again, a little girl from this town or that town would turn up, and you hear a little voice. I'd be working away and hear the voice, but Mr. Dick! Well, with a name like mine, you don't turn around too fast because you don't know what's going to be said next, you know? So, Mr. Dick, yes? Will you coach me? Well, yeah, but not at the moment because I'm working with these people. Will you coach me later? Yes, fine. When? Look, when I'm finished with them, I'll come and work with you. Where's that? Look, sit down in the stand. When I'm finished with them, I promise I'll come and work with you. Promise? Yeah, see you. Fine. Now, after I finish working with you, I'll work with her. She's 9 years of age and she wants to go to run 100 meters. And I work with her for a few weeks. She goes to her first race. She lines up with another 7 kids. On your mark. Set. Runs down the track, hurls herself at the line. 8th out of 8. In 18 seconds, comes back, oh, Mr. Dick, I was last. No, you weren't last. Yes, I was. You were. 18 seconds. What do you mean? Well, you've smashed the 20-second barrier, and I had you down for 19 seconds. You're a whole second faster than that. Do you know what this means? No, this means it's your lifetime best performance. Your own personal world record. Really? Yes. In some ways, you're a first. What do you mean? You're the first athlete I've ever coached who's run 18 seconds for the 100 meters. Now, listen, in a few weeks' time, she's got another race. What does she think winning is now? If she does 17.9, she'll grab a flag and she'll run around the track. Because that's what winning is. Winning is being better today than you were yesterday. Every day. And if she keeps on working at that, in a few weeks' time, she's fighting with other kids to get to the line. And you might think to yourself, well, surely winning now, Frank, is beating them. Not if it's in 19 seconds, it's not. Or we've killed our definition. The reason you go into tough arenas in life is to be challenged to perform better. You cannot perform better if you're not challenged. Listen, you don't learn to climb mountains in life by going round them or asking somebody for a ladder. You learn to climb mountains by climbing mountains, by seeking out the really toughest challenges, because that makes you perform better. When you keep on going at that, one day you'll be a one and only. But the truth is, she always was, is, and will be.
So I hope you enjoyed that. As I say, Frank is a real legend in British sport and made a massive difference to UK, well, athletics as it was in this country in the 80s. There's some take homes there for us, particularly around that. You know, Frank knows sport particularly well, but he recognizes the vehicle that sport provides in terms of creating challenge for young people. The other thing that's really important is the personal challenges, not peer, but he talks about challenges and he says it's a safe space in some respect to really create those challenges for young people. And that invariably, as we say, does happen all the time in sport. We all face it, both as parents and coaches, in our jobs to provide that high support that help children go through it. So let me just show you a very short, hopefully you can just see that at home and you're able to see that on your iPhone or on the phone, depending on the device that you're on. So if we just look at a real simple matrix around high challenge and high support, I think what we try to do, particularly at Millfield, and what we want to do by working with parents and young people is create high challenge, and that comes through competition, that comes through the way you train, that comes through the way you play. But for us to do that, we have to provide high support, and we can't do that on our own. We have to do it with parents who are supporting their children, because you know them better than we do, that create a right development environment. When the support isn't there, it creates stress, anxiety, frustration. So often you may see that in your children during the time in sport, and that may be because that bit isn't quite right. But equally, if the challenge isn't there in their sport, whether that's in the group or their activity you're in, you know, if we give too much support and the challenge isn't there, it can feel like too easy, it can be too comfortable, or you may also get boredom and apathy, and that creates. So it's important for us, particularly through the Millfield sporting experience, that there's enough high challenge to create a level of high support. So it's what this conversation tonight is about, what that high support looks like, particularly through those conversations. So what's our job as parents and as coaches? I'd say our number one job in these conversations, particularly as the child's going through that development experience, is to keep our eye on the prize, which is the big picture. So our job is to keep our eye on that right graph. Whereas often what the child will feel in front of them as their sporting experiences are those negative, don't let it get a bad day type graph. So our job is to try to position them, and it's really difficult to think about the long-term journey that they're on, whereas the reality is, you often only see the things playing themselves out in front of you, and our job through those conversations is to try to shift it to the right, and that's some of the things that we're going to try to go through today. So don't let a bad day influence you and distract you from the progress you've made, and I think that's the big picture message that we'd always want to try to keep to. So let me just move on. So what we're going to do at this moment in time, that just sets the scene. Obviously, Frank's experience and idea of recognizing sport and the challenge it creates is an important one. And we see that our job in creating those conversations is to keep an eye on the big picture. We're going to pick up in previous conversations we've had where we've got feedback from parents. There are a number of issues that typically arise. And what I wanted to do is call on our expert panel just to talk about how they approach those, particularly from their own experiences, but the type of support they want to work with parents to help keep the child moving on that journey. So I'm just going to introduce Tony McCullum. Tony, I'll let you just give the audience a very quick background because it's been in football, but you've been in the game a number of years. And football's important in this context as an example, because it's a sport that involves a heavy amount of competition and therefore selection in playing for young people. But I'm going to ask Tony just to share his experiences and some ideas of how they approach that where a child maybe has not been selected and the conversations that are had and how we'd want to work with parents to make that a positive experience so they're able to address the challenge when it comes again. So Tony, all yours.
Okay, thanks, Scott. Good evening, everybody. I'll try and keep this fairly brief, and I'm sure if I don't, then I'll be warned by Dr. Troa. So, like Scott said, my experiences generally have been in football over the last 30 years, and the last sort of 14 years of that was working at the Football Association in a coach education and coach sort of development perspective. But intertwined across all the years that I've been involved in the sport, I've generally worked in the youth game. So I've seen multiple experiences, if you want, of players and selection and dealing with the fallout, if you want, if non-selection, but also the impact of selection. And I think one of the things I've found, certainly being at Millfield, is that we do have a lot of enthusiastic young players who want to try and play for the school and want to try and play at the highest level of the game that their year group might allow. So when we work in the senior school, we are fairly set in the sense that we have a U14, a U15, a U16 type opportunity. And generally when selection is made within single age bands, it becomes really easy because it is literally those players that are in that age band that you pick from. The challenge sometimes when we go into the senior school is that we're dealing with that sixth form student who is a lower sixth and an upper sixth. And the difference we could get between players' ability and players' motivation and players' selection is probably based around a 2-year age band, which could in some cases be a bit of a challenge too far for some. So I think what we try and do is we try and provide a really honest approach to how we pick and allow players the opportunity to play. I think we are always challenged with the fact that there are a lot of people that want to play, but also we're determined by how many we can pick for a competition. We might have competitions sometimes that determine we can only have certain players of certain ages or opportunities at the school. So they all factor into this selection piece. But I think what we as coaches try and be is open and honest with the players from the start. There's one thing being selected, and within that squad of 16, say in football, there's the opportunity then to try and play. And generally we'll have conversations around why some people are starting. And what we now try and get players to consider is more as finishers in their opportunity instead of being deemed substitutes as previous sort of terminologies have been used. And I think that in its sense starts to help people understand that they all collectively become part of a team that is going to take part, and therefore all of them can play a part in that opportunity. I think one of the good things that we have with our youth sport is that the selection piece allows us to make selections and send players onto the field and bring players off, allow them to rest and recover, give them maybe a different challenge when they go back on, and therefore that multiple substitution piece really does help with selection. And if somebody who has an issue with being selected or not being selected for the starting opportunity, I think what we're very conscious of is that we give them elements of development within that decision. So it might well be, look, you're starting in a midfield of 2 today, but generally we've played for 3. So therefore we're not playing a third midfield player today. So there's rationale behind why we've made the decision. I think when we put the players onto the fields, and certainly in the team sports where we're identifying opponents that we might play against, again, why do we select whoever we do for the reason that we're taking part? And that might be competition. That might be a level of opportunity that we need to get some players to have because they've been out of the game through injury. So therefore we're bringing players back. It might be elements of giving people time, but also giving them chance to rest as well, because we can't just throw a player straight back in, certainly in the adolescence years like we have. And I think if anything, we're very conscious of trying to make sure that we're helping our players develop. And that might be from a technical perspective, but also it could be from a tactical perspective. And so playing in different formations, playing against different opponents, playing in different areas of the field are really important for us in terms of their development.
Tony,
we're trying to
just ask that. Yeah. So if one of the players within the group they're looking after wasn't happy with a decision, so it's getting to the point where they want to come and have a conversation with you, could you just take us through some of that, what that conversation would look like? So some of the details you'd share and what you'd want to do to support the student through that challenge? Yeah, so we've got a young midfield player at the moment who would like to try and play in the 1s but is playing in the 2s. And actually, there's players within that structure at the moment who are probably in advance of him just at this moment in time. And so if he went with the 1s, he'd probably have more opportunities to observe than he would possibly to participate because of the level of the players that he's surrounded by. But by being a starting player in the 2s, he's getting more opportunities to practice and apply his trade, and therefore put himself in a better position to get 1 selection in the future. It's that balance, and it's also that conversation we have with them to say, look, there's elements of getting game time here compared to getting limited minutes in the next level, and the more game time you get, the better it will be for your involvement in the next level in the future. So they are honest conversations. And how have those, so I think one of the key things there is you talk about you're very honest and candid in those conversations. How have they typically gone? How do you find the players and the students respond to those conversations where you've been very honest, and by the signs of it, you're very objective around how you share that information and give really good rationale for that conversation? Is it often a really healthy dialogue with the player? The student goes away enthused and just continues to see the opportunity to work through it? There'll always be a piece where it doesn't quite land as you hoped, and I think it's if you want revisiting those conversations on a regular basis, so checking in with them as to the reason how they might have got on in a 2s game compared to not getting an opportunity in the 1s, being able to feed back to the coach who maybe takes another team and say, look, he did really well in this game. We think that there's a moment now where we could start to move them into the next level or the next opportunity. And again, sharing that with the students. And I think one of the good things is getting feedback from them as to how it looks and feels. And we appreciate that it might not necessarily be the message or the answer that they want, but at the same time, we're trying to help them understand their long-term development, and therefore this is just a moment, if you want, on that development journey with us, and other opportunities will subsequently come in the future. And if a parent of that student made contact and was to say the question to you, can you give me some advice and things I could do to support my child through this challenge? What would you say? Really interesting piece. There's a young player playing for us at the moment. I was having a conversation with Dad a couple of weeks ago, and he's a goal scorer in his level at the moment, but playing in a if you want an under-18s offer, he doesn't get as many opportunities because the game is different. But we can see what he will be in the future. And so it's having that conversation to say, look, he's going to get 20 minutes here, or we're going to give him a half, or he's not going to start, but he's going to come on, or he's going to start and he's going to come off. So it's those honest conversations, and actually what success might look like for Dad is different to what success might look like for us. So it might be
playing against a different type of opponent is what we need him to experience, where he doesn't always get the successes that he's had previously. So it's correct challenge if you want. If someone else's observation is he hasn't scored today, then we're just trying to make sure we can manage the expectation piece, which is today's opportunity is about dealing with a person who marks you really close and is quicker than you. Therefore, how do you, if you want, come up with a coping strategy for that, compared to I got 3 goals this week and not necessarily learned anything more from the experience.
Yeah, and that's similar to Frank's 18-second analogy, isn't it? You're trying to find some very own specific things for that individual that help show that they're improving. So good. All right. Well, thank you for that one. And like we know, selection is always a challenge for lots of people as part of their developmental journey, especially when playing up and playing down. And I think you did that and articulated that really, really well. I mean, if for anyone if you do have questions on some of these, you can put them in through the chat that we can pick up as we go as well. So we'll pick up one other that typically comes up a lot. And this one's injury. And invariably, young people and young students who are really passionate about their sport want to do it every day. And the nature of that means at times, and sports a risky environment, people do pick up injury, and therefore they're not part of their group. And Mark's got a significant amount of experience in that one. So Mark, I'm just going to pass across to you just to talk about often how those conversations go with young people and some of your thoughts and ideas of how you work with parents as well to support them through that. And just, some practical things that you've done to help them work it through.
Yeah, I mean, it's a common thing. Whenever you've got young athletes and aspirational athletes, they're going to be pushing their bodies really hard. And what tends to happen in every sport that I watch anyway, is that as people get older and stronger and they go up the levels, then the speed of the competition goes up. So the collisions get bigger, the changes of directions become more acute at fast speed, and injuries do happen, unfortunately. In our sport, our main prevalent injuries are ball hit in the body from a batting or fielding point of view. And then from a fast bowling point of view, our stress fractures that happen because effectively you've got 8 to 10 times your body weight going through your skeleton every time you deliver a ball at fast pace. So first things that we try and do before we get to a point of injury is trying to mitigate risk as much as possible. And that's where our sports science team, led by Graham Williams, and this year we've got Matt Smith as our S&C coach, are doing some incredible work, aligned with Aaron, who's in physio, and Ethan, our fast bowling coach, particularly around the fast bowling groups, try and mitigate the risk as much as we can. And it's great to see that the boys and girls really buying into that program. And historically, we're getting better and better at supporting those young cricketers as they make their transition into the adult game, which is awesome. But when injuries do come along, we've got a 4-pronged attack really in terms of our strategy that we go with. The first one is connection. So we've actually had an injury this week, and I'm not pointing any fingers at you, Tony, in football, but one of our lads who's a cricketer has picked up a really nasty injury in the last couple of weeks playing football, obviously probably at the worst time of year for him because he's just going into the cricket season. And it's likely that he's not going to play cricket until August, or maybe not even at all this summer. So that's devastating to that particular young player. And the first thing they need is connection. They need to feel that they're connected to the cricket department. They need to feel that they're connected to their friends that they were going to play cricket with, and that they've got a bit of a roadmap really to maintain that connection and develop on that connection over the course of the 9-week cricket season, and also our 3 weeks we've got going into Easter now, which is so important. So connection is really cool. So what does that look like practically? Well, when he gets back into school, he's had an operation, so he's on the recovery. When he gets back into school, he'll come and contribute within our group sessions. So it might mean that if we can get him sitting on a bowling machine, that he can feed some balls. It might mean that he's doing a monitored session. It might be that he's umpiring a session and contributing in that way. It could be that he's there to hold video cameras and to give some feedback to people in a fielding session. All of these things help them to stay connected and also building towards something in summer that they might not be able to contribute in runs and wickets and catches, but they can contribute in their input, which is really important. Then when we come to the season, we've got further coaching opportunities. We've also got doing the match analysis, which is something that, performance analysis is going through the roof, and it gives players that are injured an insight into their own game as much as anybody else's as well, to be able to get behind a computer, to be able to put some keystrokes into a data analysis sheet and actually see what the outputs are on the other side as well. So that's something that's really good. And we then encourage that person to feed back to the team instead of us doing it, feeding back to the team with their own insights, which gives them a great sense of confidence and also contributing towards going forward. And then context, we've got so many examples of Millfield cricketers and sports people who have had injuries over the years. And often when you're in that place where you've got a bad injury, you think that you're the only person that's going through it. And the reality is that history repeats in high performance sport and aspiring sport. So we've got great stories and we can connect people up. So Simon Jones, who I was lucky enough to coach in England days, had one of the most horrific injuries in world sport, where at the top of his game, he completely mashed his knee up by going for a sliding stop at the Gabba. And he's always available to talk to our young players about how he coped with those development times. He had 2 years out of the game before he came back to effectively contribute massively towards an Ashes win in 2005. So trying to build context is really important. Giving them case studies of people like Casey Aldridge, who got injured in year 11 as a medium pace bowler and a lower order batter. We just stuck him in to open the batting in the Mayors next year because we knew he wouldn't bowl a ball because of his stress fracture. And that developed him into an all-rounder. And when he came back in upper six, bowling absolute rockets, because he also realised that he missed bowling, which was the best thing in the game for him. So he trained really hard with Graham and his team. He came back bowling 83 mile an hour and got signed at the end of the summer. That experience for him was like the turning point, the epiphany, I suppose, that he had that turned him into a real top quality performer. And that's the opportunity that can come along with injuries as well, that you can look at different aspects of your game, whether it's a physical, whether it's a tactical, whether it's developing a second skill, that often come along when you have an injury, particularly in our sport.
Mark,
they're the main things for me.
Yeah, and Rhian, just pick up on something and probably similar related to Tony. So if the students are only with us 30 weeks a year, and then they could be at home 20 weeks a year with the parents, and if parents were to make contact around whether it's conversations or guidance or support, they could equally give to the child in and around the excellent stuff that you're doing, what would your advice be?
Well, we try and take them through that anyway, because the parent has to be involved. So the first thing we do after we've made contact with the pupil is actually to get the parents on board as well, and tell them exactly what the process that we're going to go through and how we're going to support. And often they're able to give a real individual insight in how we can tweak that. Because, as much as you just said there, we have 32 weeks with them a year. The best chance we have is 5 years with anybody that comes into year 9. And often we're inheriting people coming into sixth form for their last 2 years. We've got a very limited amount of time, and there's a huge amount of experience now in our parent body that can be really insightful. So that's the first thing. The second thing is we see a lot of external physios working with the players because they're so far away from us for so much of a year, and trying to get those connections going into Aaron and his team is really, really useful. To get physios and specialists talking to our medical team, I can't tell you how important that is. And the earlier we get that in place and maintain that, I think it's so important. From a context point of view, Scott, Aaron's the second best physio that I've worked with, and I've been really lucky to work with some really cool ones. So, we need to trust him. And when that happens, we get people back from injury so much quicker, which is really cool. And then just to understand that it's part of the process. If you watch anybody's graph from the age of 10 up to playing international sport, they're not going to have a road map like that. There's going to be bumps along the way, and often those are attributed to injury. So understanding that, being tolerant of that, and seeing the opportunities that come along as a result is brilliant, I think.
And I think just to sort of summarize, your key thing there is around just the connection. So the connection from you and with parents is just being connected, because then there's consistent messages for the young person who's trying to work through that challenge. And as much as we may do to redirect the focus and all of those scenarios, of course, not being able to play the game and at times is going to be a challenge. But I think everything around there is good. Yeah,
it's brutal. And rehab is boring, isn't it? Let's be brutally honest. Rehab is pretty dull.
Yeah, but I love the way you're creative around that, and by bringing in the parents, that's great. Okay, so let's just go on to the third, and I think this one is one that we commonly see. Rhian, sorry to throw you the most difficult one, and also in probably a sport that's not as measurable as some of us. It's the one that I often hear around, when you're training within a group or within an environment, there's often a lot of peer comparison. And I'd say Frank in his sort of video explains how to remove that in some senses. But how do you approach that with a young person who maybe is facing that challenge where others around them are developing much quicker, because such is the nature of this development age, and maybe that creates some additional stress for them. But what are the types of conversations we have them to keep them focused on their individual experiences? And then the second part of that, like with the other ones, is, so what role would you want to play with parents to also provide that same support mechanism? So peer comparison.
Yeah, I think I have got the hardest one. Thanks.
Sorry about that.
It's okay. It's really interesting though, because actually I think it's part of their developmental stage in terms of their growing up, isn't it? Is that they are naturally between 11 and 18, we compare ourselves against each other all the time. And that's part of the kind of human condition. I asked them questions, and actually one of the things we've done in dance in particular is to kind of diversify the pathways and go, we don't need dancers to be the same. Do you know what I mean? I think we quite often meet very traditional expectations of dance, where we're expecting a corps de ballet of identikit dancers. Now, actually, we know 21st century dance, we want individuals. So it's a little bit about redirecting the pathway and the kind of the expectations of where are they going. And that hopefully is as individualized as we can make it, in terms of a program where they're not necessarily not all students follow the same program. They've got a tailored program at different levels. So we might be an expert here, but actually there's another beginner's mindset required, because you're going to try some choreography, which is a very different challenge. So I think we can pitch challenge at one time within lots of different areas, and that's really interesting, so that we kind of diversify that way. I like asking the questions, you know, with students of why do you want to be the same? And I've kind of noticed this two-way pathway that sometimes, or most frequently, I meet, you know, side-by-side comparison. It's the people next to you, it's the people that are accessing the movement more effectively, or finding that their physicality is stronger. And I find that relatively straightforward, in that we can accept that bodies move at different times and that we grow at different times. You know, proprioception and growth spurts are a really difficult time in dance when we don't quite understand our body in space. The one that I find slightly more challenging to unpick with a student is kind of a comparison of what's happened before and where they should be in comparison to an older role model, or a big brother or big sister. And that one quite often takes a little bit more to work with, because we're coming into that area of role models and aspirations and things that they've been holding on to and aiming for a lot longer. So again, it's breaking it down into individual stories, I think, and individual pathways. But making sure, we've tried in dance to make sure that our community is vertical as well as horizontal. So these role models in upper sixth are actually sitting and dancing and talking to you at lunchtime before sessions, so that kind of pedestal is possibly dropped a little bit, so we realise that they're challenged in different ways as well. Does that kind of answer that bit? Yeah, no, I mean, I love the fact, the individual nature that you have, actually, the strength of your discipline as individualism is celebrated, and in some contexts within sport that often isn't. So I think you're able to get there. And when those conversations happen with students, do they receive them really well and recognise the opportunity that it presents as opposed to the challenge? Not straight away, let's be honest. I think sometimes it's an ongoing conversation. I think one of the things we've done is we have very clear pathways that we're following, and we have an IDP so that a student knows where they're going, but also that the conversation continues. So, you know, it's okay, let's have this conversation today, go away, I'll see you again tomorrow, and let's keep it going and allow it to build and develop, because there's a huge emotional aspect to this. There's a whole set of, you know, we talk about self-talk and what students are telling themselves and how that comes into comparison, and they'll all tell us that teenage years is a very judgmental time, and we're kind of externalizing that. So any form of comparison is going to have an emotional impact. I don't think I can fix that, or we can fix that in one conversation. Love to, but it, you know, we're much more about that continued conversation. And actually, one of the aspects that I think is really helpful that we've talked about in dance and drama is the language that we use when we're talking about the students and when we're talking to them. So if we're not comparing them to each other, we're kind of modeling that idea that in our language that they're allowed to not be compared. And I think that's something that is a lovely message to go home to parents as well, is that we try. It's really hard to go, well, they played really well today, weren't they fabulous, or they looked brilliant in that movement, when are you going to do that? And that type of talk is very normal, isn't it? It's what we do, particularly in performance. But actually we've challenged ourselves as coaches to not compare in sessions, and maybe that's a one way in which we can impact it a little. It's great.
I really like that. It's really positive. So a parent calls you up, top 2 tips you'd give them in a situation where the student is also talking about that at home, so the child is still doing a lot of that peer comparison, and they're reaching out for you to say, like, what can we do to support the journey that you're trying to take them on? What would you say?
I would, first of all, let me think this through. I think I'd go with a set of questions, because it's interesting how they would reply. So do you need to be the same as them? And also, what is it you admire? Because we can flip it quite effectively into aspiration, can't we? What is it you admire about what they're doing? And then how can you ask your coach what you need to do in order to get there? Because then suddenly we've created an aspiration and a motivation that I think is really nice. I also ask them about how they see their success, I think, and hopefully, and I've never met 2 students that want exactly the same thing. I think they're all individuals, even if we're on quite a straight pathway. So our job then is to kind of listen and move them into that sense of their own individual. You know, we talk a lot in dance and drama about their own creative voice. This is when we develop it, but their own physical ability as well. You know, some of our best dancers started as athletes and moved in through conversations like this. So
yeah, no, really good. So I like those. I mean, why do you want to be the same? What do you admire in that individual that you want? And how can you work with your coach together? I think that's some really good tips there. So thank you for those. Hopefully some of that is useful. We're just gonna move on, actually, because those are, you'll see something coming up on Menti, but those are 3 scenarios that typically do play themselves out. And as I said, in previous conversations we've had, they're the ones that often come up when people talk about challenges. So I'm just interested if there's any more. So you can now, through the Menti app, if you just go on there, if there's any other challenging experiences your child has faced so far in their sporting journey that you'd like to share, because we'll pick out one of those before we just move on to some other engagement. So if you go back to the app, it should come up. You can put a short answer in, just to share a few, and we'll see them as they come up, and I'll pick out 1 or 2 and just have dialogue with Rhian, Mark and Tony on their approach to some of those situations. So feel free to drop something in now. I won't answer if you've got anything. If we don't get anything in the next minute, then I'll just move on. So I'll give you an opportunity in case there's a particular experience or challenge that you think your child has faced that you'd like to talk through. That's a really good one. Mark, you're right to pick that one up. So no longer top of the tree, surrounded by bigger, better players. So that's the challenge at the beginning to see. It's the reality of development. Everyone grows at slightly different rates. What sorts of conversations would you have with that student and that child, and the same for the parent, to help them work it through?
And we see this in year 9 all the time, Scott, because particularly those pupils that come from the prep school, we obviously attract people from all parts of the world into year 9, and often somebody who's been the top of the tree in the prep school for 5 years or 4 years finds himself being number 2 or number 3 in their own reckoning. And for me, it's just a great opportunity. You know, one of the things that's brilliant about Millfield is the hothouse that we have of talented players and different voices, going back to what Rhian said, that you can really learn from. So, and it's not really about, let's be honest, it's not really about where you are whilst you're at school. It's what you leave with. So we're always talking about transition points. And if you're not the best player in the year group, well, you know, ultimately, who cares? And ultimately, it's about where you get to by the time you leave in your own right, going back to, again, to echo some of the things that Rhian talked about. So, yeah, if you start off being the best player in the prep school and you end up being the best player in the senior school all the way through, then it probably means we haven't attracted very many good players. would be my real call on it, because as soon as the pool opens up, better players come along, and it's about inspiring yourself to compete and learn from those players as best you possibly can.
And I guess the other things that I've sort of seen you do really well, Mark, in those sorts of situations is for those players to focus on what their super strengths are.
Big time.
So you may not be the biggest, the best then, but what is it that you are world class at in this environment here, and how can we accentuate and bring that one? So I've seen you do that really, really well. So that's a good one.
Well, our sport enables it, Scott, because we're getting smaller and smaller the over a game, and the games and the overs that we have in a game, so they can have a super strength for 2 or 3 balls and make an impact on a match now, which is wicked.
Yeah, that's good. Tony, I'm just going to pick this other one up about where, say, an individual may come from a different school and expects suddenly to walk into the first team. So if we use your football as an example, but it's challenging. Got a big cohort of young people who want to play football. It's a worldwide sport, bigger participation base than most. So, somebody comes in and that expectation's suddenly been dashed. They're probably not as strong as competitive, and are not likely to get there. So how would you manage that conversation with that child who came to you saying, well, I thought I was going to walk in straight away? And we know, say, in the senior first team, the reality is made up majority of uppers who've been through a bit of a long journey. So just some quick reflections on that one.
I think in that senior boys, certainly in football, there's probably the best part of 60 players that think they should be playing for the first team. And the reality is that, some will be better at this moment in time than others. So it's trying to get things in perspective. And I think what I'm very conscious of, and just alluded to it there, was it's this transition. We're supporting them over the next couple of years on a transition into the adult game that they'll leave the school and go into. So what can we prepare them for in that sense, so that the big pool that they'll end up in next will be even bigger and even deeper and even wider? And therefore, how do we sort of help them become an exponent of their sport, so that they can go into sport in the future? So seeing Millfield as a transition piece, various opportunities to play, different teams to play with, different challenges to face internally as well as externally. And I think, everybody is on a similar sort of journey. Now, I'll throw this one into you. So I worked at Southampton a few years ago, and we had a cohort of very talented young players. And there was a young boy called Gareth who came, and he was from a little place near Newport in Wales. And he wasn't quite the best at the time. And when he got to 16, he wasn't quite the best either. But he also was challenged by, there was other people at the club at the time that were better or perceived better. And the club took a punt, if you want to call it that, and over a 6-week period evaluated him in playing against different types of players, and then made a decision to sign him. I suppose the rest of it is history then, because at 16 he was about to be released, and at 17 he was in the first team, and at 20 he'd been sold to Tottenham, Real Madrid, and played for his country and did all of that. But he was exactly that. He was a big fish in a small pond, and when he arrived in a professional club setting, he was just another player who at times wasn't quite the best, and therefore had similar sort of struggles. So I think our players, certainly in the football perspective, I think what we're trying to do is help that transition process. It's 2 years of transitioning into adult football, and we want to give them experiences and opportunities that challenge and match their needs and desires at the moment.
Yeah, there's a Tony, you just made a point there, and Mark's made it earlier. I think what you're both able to call on to help in that challenging process are really good stories. So real stories from Millfield that the students can connect to, but also others, because of your experience outside of, you worked at all levels of the game, you're able to call on those to articulate that. So I think that was really powerful. It's one tool in that high challenge, high support box that you're able to call on. Rhian, I'm going to call on this one for you, just about plateaus, because I think this is a good one. And of course, in highly measurable sports, it's something that you can see, but through that development process, students will often hit a plateau. We'll be putting lots of work in, and others will be going at a different rate, and they may not feel they're at that rate, or just stagnated. So in that situation, can you just talk us through your approach when you've seen that, and what you do to help them work it through?
I think one of my favorite phrases that I realized I possibly overuse is this idea of that's called learning, that's called progress. And actually, that's okay. A bit like Mark said, we're not on a straight incline at any point. I also, there's more creative responses. I think it's quite interesting to look at that kind of the bigger picture. We meet quite a lot of students that work towards one performance in our situation or exam, and then we kind of dip and then we plateau quite often after. So for us at the moment, we're in a bit of a plateau because there's nothing quite there. The motivation is there, and the slow and steady kind of focus and technical aspect is there. But we also try at that point to bring something else in, so that again, opening it up, so we're looking at maybe a different way of measuring that, what the progress is. I think I keep coming back to it a little bit, but I think sometimes that psychological challenge is really hard, and a really good learning point if we do plateau is, okay, I might be physically ready, but psychologically what's going on? And there's a lovely question that we use quite a lot of, what's stopping us at this point? And is there anything stopping us, or is it actually progress? Is it learning and we're just kind of here for a little while before we're ready to make the next step? It's that awareness, I think, that we can't achieve it all the time. Again, lovely across school in every aspect of the school life, isn't it?
And I guess one of the things, as we know, in that development process, that's inevitable. There are plateaus, and sometimes you go backwards as well as forwards. Hence that sort of graph I tried to show at the start, that there are bad days, and it's been able to remember that long-term journey that people are on and use stories to bring that to life. And yeah, parents staying connected with us if need be, for us to be able to use those to support that child. I think one thing that you made, I think, which is really important, is variety, and particularly at this age group where that is beginning to happen, whether you can create a different stimulus at that moment in time that creates something fresh in the mind, and that may be the thing that just kicks it on. And that could be through multi-sport, that could be through different types of training, that could be other things that we've seen. So has anyone got any examples where you've seen that happen? Tony, Mark, Rhian?
Yeah, you know that I'm quite big on session design. So if there's anything that's a bit clunky and anything that somebody's struggling with, we'll just throw a different terminology, a different session design around the same thing. And often that sort of subconscious way of breaking through that problem ends up being the sort of, I don't know, the magic bullet that takes them to the next level. So, and that's one of the things about Millfield. I think it's not just those conversations, it's not just the psychological work, it's just the creativity of the coaches within our environment is very different to what we see in many of the pathways. And we're almost happy to take a risk with our session designs to try and kickstart that next stage, really. And that's something that we see a lot. I certainly see it in my environment, and from listening to other people talk, I think it's pretty prevalent across the school.
Brilliant. Well, listen, we have actually run out of time. We've got a lot more content I wanted to cover, but I mean, the idea of these sorts of sessions is just really to introduce some of the thoughts and areas within Millfield and to provide a real connection to parents. We always want you to connect to us to work through these challenges, which we know are a natural part of the sporting experience. So Rhian, Mark, Tony, really appreciate you giving up your evening to share some of your thoughts and experiences. As I say, this will be recorded, and thank you to all of those who've logged in to sort of listen. So we'll send this out to all others who are interested on different time zones, but hopefully you'll get one or two nuggets from it. I think the essence of we sort of try to start with this Parents in Sport series is sport is a really challenging but fun and engaging environment, and it's dynamic, it's highly unpredictable for those young people, but challenge is a great thing. And I think the way we want to approach it is provide that high levels of support, and hopefully you had some really good examples from dance, from cricket and football tonight to show how we do that. So actually there's one chat comment just come in. Oh, someone said thank you for everyone, so really appreciate you logging in, and hopefully you got something out of it. But everybody have a good evening. Mark, thank you, Rhian and Tony, and enjoy your evening, everybody, and we look forward to seeing you on campus soon. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers all. Thank you.